Welcome to the Resilience Files, a podcast investigating human stories of struggle and triumph in the quest to explore the true nature of well-being and resilience and discover the secret to a resilience that lasts. Our guest today, Linda Bloom, is a formidable woman with an inspiring story that speaks to the human capacity to intuitively fight for our right to have a better life than the one we are often told we will have. Linda imbues an inner wisdom and is a role model of how to be a student of life, especially as it throws some harsh curveballs at you. Linda also happens to be the wife of Tony Bloom, owner of Brighton FC, the Premier Football Club, who are doing pretty well in the league at the moment. Sorry, but I do have a house full of boys. However, in 2002, Linda's life changed dramatically when she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis following debilitating symptoms. Finding herself increasingly disabled and unable to move independently, she was told to take medication and accept her illness. However, Linda sought a different path to the conventional one, and after attending a retreat by Professor Jelinek in Melbourne, Australia, she followed the OMS program and within a year was healed from all symptoms. Linda attributes her healing to this evidence-based approach based primarily on lifestyle changes, and we'll be exploring how that works in this episode. Linda subsequently moved to the UK and established the OMS charity, which is a resource for thousands of MS sufferers. Linda is also a trustee of the Bloom Foundation, which looks for effective ways to address social issues and help people help themselves. For me personally, Linda's voice is such an important one, and I resonate deeply with her message. Through my own challenges with my physical health over the last 2 years, which I'll definitely do a podcast on in the near future, I've come to appreciate more and more that part of being a psychologically resilient human is understanding firstly that there's a mind-body connection, and secondly, how that works. This is something that a lot of people, including myself, struggle with. Linda is someone who's super clear about this and as a result has made sound and brave decisions about her health. So without further ado, brace yourself for a deep conversation that covers the psychological impact of an incurable diagnosis to making a full recovery, touches on what it means to be spiritual, surviving lockdown in Australia, and being the child of Holocaust survivors. So Linda, welcome to the Resilience Files. Really great to have you. So Linda, our paths crossed quite a few years ago, and you made a big impression on me at the time. And the reason is that what you'd been through really resonated for me, and I think it will resonate with a lot of people out there because for many reasons. One of the reasons is that you came across mainstream experts who gave you quite a bleak outlook on your diagnosis at the time and the treatments that were available for you. And you seemed to say there must be another way. And that is not the norm because most people feel like the experts are the experts. And this is especially, I've seen it with regards to our physical and mental health to a degree. And that's something I really want to explore with you on the podcast today and on this episode. But before we get to that, I want to go back to 2002 and ask you if you could just describe what happened that year that essentially changed your life.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. But also just to say that initial conversation that we had all of those years ago really resonated with me as well, hearing your story and how much you had overcome. And so I felt very honored, actually, that you invited me to participate today.
Oh, thank you.
But to go back in time, 20 years and about 2 weeks ago, actually, I was at work one day and I started getting numbness and tingling sensations kind of coming up my legs. And it was a familiar feeling because the year before that, I'd had something similar, numbness and tingling, almost exactly a year before. Came up my legs. I felt it was really weird, went to see a doctor and sent to a neurologist who said, don't worry about it, come back if it happens again. And a year later, it was happening again, but it was much more dramatic and it was happening much quicker. So the numbness and tingling that I had started spreading through my body, through my hands and up my arms. I had this tightness in my chest. It was like painful with every breath. And I knew something wasn't right. And so I went to see a neurologist, and after having some tests done, I was told that I had multiple sclerosis. And the news was quite devastating, to say the least. I was 28 at the time. I was kind of in the prime of my life. I was, living on my own. I'd actually just broken up from a 7-year relationship.
Wow.
And here I was living the life.
Wow.
And then to be told literally from one minute to another that, I've got this chronic condition. There's really not much you can do about it. It was shattering, to say the least.
How do you emotionally and psychologically take that in? I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if I'm sure, but I would assume there's shock at first because, and especially when you go all the way back 20 years ago, getting a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis probably very different to what it is now, I'm assuming. Maybe you can tell me. And also just the fact that it's not something that's curable. It's not like, oh, we can do something and make it go away.
Yep.
How do you psychologically and emotionally, how did you process that?
Yeah, great question. I think, there have been many stages and iterations of that over the last 20, well, not so much lately, but over those initial years. And yes, you're right. There's no, there still is no cure. Cure in inverted commas. And that's what I was told. There's nothing you can do. Come back when you're in a wheelchair. That's the kind of message that I was given. And really shockingly, still people are given that type of message now. There was at the time 3 medications available. Now there's a huge raft of medications available. And there's been a lot of research in that area, so it's moved along a lot in the last 20 years. But so when I was diagnosed, I was told, here are 3 brochures. Go away and tell me, which medication you want to take. And at that time, it was all injectable, and you could inject every day or every other day. The side effects of the medications were, from what I read, pretty horrendous. And it was a strange thing, actually, for me personally, and you alluded to this before, but I had this sense, which I really still can't even explain logically. I had always had a difficulty with medication myself, that I didn't react very well to pharmaceutical medication. And so when I was given this choice, I was like, but it just didn't sit well with me. And so I made the decision not to take any medication. And that was a very personal decision. Whether I'd make the same decision now, 20 years later, I'm not sure. And certainly in terms of what we advocate, medication is very much part of the program for people who choose to take it. So I'm not saying don't take medication at all, but that was very much my personal decision and experience. And there was a sense that I was going to be okay, which seemed really weird because I was bedridden and I couldn't move off the couch for 3 months, and I needed 24/7 care. And I moved in with my sister, who's, a medical doctor, and she had 2 young kids, and took me under her wing and, took me to the toilet when I needed and helped me eat. And
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty scary stuff. So, and within all of that, I still had this sense that I was going to be okay and that there had to be something out there that I could do for myself. But I didn't buy into that message that there's nothing you can do and it's a downhill spiral.
Yes. I actually get cold shivers when you said those words, like, I knew that I'd be okay. And you said it wasn't a logical thing, but it was just like almost a deep knowing. And I relate to that so much because 8 years ago, I got all these neurological symptoms and the doctors were doing lots of tests. They were looking for MS and a whole bunch of things, thinking something was attacking, my neurological system. And I just got sicker and sicker. I had migraines and facial palsy and double vision and having seizures. And I was in bed. I couldn't see or read or do anything. I couldn't have any outside stimulation. And my mind got so quiet and I felt so deeply okay in those 4 months. I remember going for test results and my husband bursting out crying, like at times when the neurologist was saying the MRI is clear or something. And he was living with an anxiety that I just didn't have. And I also had this deep sense I would be okay. And it was almost independent of outcome, like what would happen. I just felt so deeply okay, which is, later, I'd already been doing the work I do, which teaches us that you can connect with a part of us where we know that we're okay inside, independent of even physical health. And I mean, that's come to serve me now, which I don't want to get into in this podcast, but just struggling the last 2 years with chronic fatigue and chronic pain, which is difficult when it's chronic because that was more an acute period. But knowing that my mind independently can feel free, and even when you have health issues, is an incredible thing for humans to know. And if you don't know that, it can just crush you, if you think the one is dependent on the other. So it's so interesting that you had that come up for you. It's a real gift.
Yeah, I agree. It is a gift. And it was a period of time where because like what you were describing, I couldn't read a book, I couldn't watch TV. So it was a lot of time of inner contemplation or just sitting, meditating, being, because that's all I could do. But not do. And especially after, living a busy, doing life, to have that time of quiet. And it was a time also that I really started to connect with my spirituality. And actually, to be honest, I'd say reconnect with my spirituality, because it was something that I'd dabbled in, explored in my early 20s when I'd spent some time traveling and met some extraordinary people, and someone who introduced me to meditation, and had some profound experiences then. And I'd kind of lost my way from that perspective spiritually. And in some ways, the diagnosis of MS felt like a wake-up call to reconnect with whatever that is, something bigger than us. And then a lot of profound things started to happen.
So, and I want to talk about all the kind of lifestyle and changes and what you learned when you didn't go with the conventional route. But now that you've kind of brought it up, I want to just ask you about the spirituality piece, because the thing for me is that, I'm a spirituality fan. But for spirituality to me is very practical in my life. And most people, when you say spirituality or spiritual, and I know that I've heard you saying that the spiritual element has been a big part of the healing. And I believe it is a big part of any kind of healing we do. but a lot of people found it very intangible or nefarious. Like they don't know what it means or how to grasp it or see the link between that and physical or even psychological healing. Could you tell us from your perspective, like just a little bit more about that? Like, what was it about the spiritual you connected to? What did you learn? How did it help you? I know that's probably not such an easy question.
No,
but,
it's not actually. And I'm not sure I've ever verbalized my thoughts about it. So let's see. Let's see what comes
your
out.
Best.
I think for me, it was through sitting with stillness, I started to hear and see more clearly.
Yeah.
And it felt like what I was hearing and feeling was within me and
Beyond you.
Beyond, without me. And that whatever's the bigger picture, whatever you call it, and it was kind of like it's everywhere and it's here and it's part of me, but I needed to be in stillness to hear and to feel that. I'm not sure that's, I don't know. That's not a practical kind of answer.
But I think it is practical. I'll tell you why, from my experience, is that when the mind quietens down, we have a wisdom, which to me, and I always say on this podcast, I use the God word. Some people aren't comfortable with that, but since I am, I'll use it for me. But that wisdom, almost a God wisdom or a higher wisdom, of which we are a part of that, as you say. It's almost bigger than us, but we're a part of it.
Yeah.
We hear it, and it gives us information. And that information is not just our best guess, because when this kind of part of us is covered by our own kind of insecure thinking, we just trying to make our best guess at what to do to help ourselves. But when it's uncovered and we have access to it, the information is exactly the information needed. It's responsive to life. It's an intelligence that's responsive to life. And it's beautiful, because when you connect into it, not only is it practically giving you this information, this kind of clarity on what the next step is and what you need to know, but it also at a deep level, it feels healing. It feels healing. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that description. And it just reminds me actually of in the very early days after my diagnosis, and I went on a retreat that this professor of medicine, who we'll get to shortly, I'm sure, but he was running in the countryside in Victoria, in Melbourne, just outside of Melbourne in Australia. And I was really poorly, and I could barely even sit up through this 5-day course. I was sitting on a beanbag in the middle of the room and struggling to kind of be present. But I just remember this one day getting enough strength to walk up this hill. So it's, the Aussie outback, and walking up this hill, and I get to the top of it, and I'm so proud of myself because I got to the top of it. And I sat down in the grass, and there are kangaroos, literally kangaroos, kind of bounding out of it. It's this kind of surreal thing. And I was sitting there, and I just had this image that came to me, and it was the weirdest thing at that point in my life, but it was an image of me standing on a stage in a stadium talking to people, like lots of people, thousands of people. And actually I feel quite emotional thinking about that, but it was like, a message or something that I couldn't understand at all. But it was another sort of thing that gave me that feeling of confidence that I was going to be all right and that this had happened for a reason.
Yes.
And I just had to find out what that was.
Beautiful. I've literally got cold shivers. I'm just like tingling on that. Gosh, very powerful. So, and I want to come to the professor because, and what he taught you, but just before that, I was thinking this capacity to be able to independently think for ourselves and to see the way forward, in spite of some of the noise coming from the outside, is something that I've seen a lot of people struggle with. And it is one of the qualities, we share with young people and adults, but young people particularly, that is innate or built into our psyche, is that we have the capacity for this wisdom you were talking about, this way to think and to, and to respond to life and know what the way forward is for ourselves. And taking in all the information around us, it doesn't mean that we disregard. We take that into account, but then we think for ourselves. But for a lot of people, we kind of humans live in a world where we need validation in order to feel secure. We think we need people to validate us and appreciate us. And so we get so confused by all the opinions and voices. Was it just that this was such a big moment in your life and you kind of got quiet and saw another way forward? Or was there anything in your background or upbringing, your parents, the way they parented you, that kind of almost cultivated this ability to think independently and unconventionally to a degree?
Wow. My background, my upbringing was my family. My dad was a Holocaust survivor, is a Holocaust survivor.
Wow.
And my grandma and most of the family were killed in the Holocaust. And they from Hungary, and they survived the Holocaust. That's a whole other story. And then the Hungarian Revolution happened in 1956, and the Russians came in, a bit like what's happening in Ukraine now. And that's when they escaped. And they escaped. So my father and my mother, in their snow boots, so the story goes, went into a registry office and got married, and the next day escaped. And then following that, my grandma and my dad's sister, who was 8 at the time, 16 years younger than her brother, stayed behind. And my aunt was crying every day and, was so upset that he'd left. So they followed and happened to meet up in Austria and came together went to Australia. Because they wanted to get as far away as possible. So when you ask the question, my thinking is how much consciously, unconsciously of past familial trauma impacts us and our generation. So that's kind of the historical piece. And then when I was 6 years old, my mother died of cancer. She had breast cancer. She died. And then my dad remarried, and my stepmom suffered from mental illness. She had schizophrenia.
Sure.
And so that was very challenging. Growing up, she was in and out of hospital and mental hospitals, and then she actually suicided 5 years ago. So So when you ask the question, sort of,
Wow.
all that comes to mind, and I can't put my finger on which part of that story had an impact, but I think having gone through, quite a bit of adversity, I think that built a lot of strength.
Yeah.
Wow. Not that I was conscious of that at the time, but in retrospect, in retrospect, actually, all of that was a blessing because it led me to, where I am today.
100%. So we talk a lot about the hero's journey, and that part of the hero's journey is when we encounter adversity. It's the grappling and struggling with that makes us have to dig deep and find these inner resources. And, and as you say, you almost, when you're younger, you don't realize that consciously, but that's happening because you have to find a way to make sense and navigate and go to school when this has just happened, the incidences at home and be in a classroom with kids who are, having a normal life, so to speak. And that builds us, there's a beautiful quote I actually have here by someone called Peter Crone. And the quote is, "Life will present you with people and circumstances to show you where you are not free." I'll say it again. Life will present you with people and circumstances to show you where you're not free. And it's all these parts of us that are not quite developed. It's almost like we come up against them. We don't realize they're not developed. And in order to find more inner freedom, we need to move through them and learn something. I mean, we can put our heads in the sand and not learn anything, and that's also a human response. But if we don't do that, it builds us, it develops us. It sounds like, you had a lot of adversity. There was no kind of pampered, protected childhood, in the usual sense that many, I think my children, a lot of kids have, where you had to deal with a lot.
Yeah, and you say that, but also something that I had that I'm so grateful for, that I know that a lot of people don't have, is love. Actually. And I have always known that I've been loved, by my mother. I don't remember much about her, but I know that she did love me. By my dad, who's now 90 and amazing and doing push-ups every day and just learnt to play the violin.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Into your video, it's amazing. And, by my broader family. And I think, in a way, that has been the buffer to the trauma, and that has helped in building that resilience.
Yeah, very much.
And
when you have that as a child, it just gives you that foundation, that kind of, to be able to then go forward and do your thing with what's coming at you. So tell me, just going a bit back to MS, because some of our listeners might not be so familiar with what MS is and, what does it mean? How do you get it? Is it something genetic, or is it just something that so maybe you could just give us a little bit of information about it.
Sure. So MS is a condition that affects the body's central nervous system. So it's the brain and the spinal cord. And it's when the body's immune system attacks the myelin coating. So the brain and the spinal cord have a coating, almost like an electric wire, and the body attacks itself, and it starts away at that wire. And depending on where that happens, if it's in the brain or whereabouts on the spinal cord, can have various effects on us physiologically. So it's an illness of inflammation and of demyelination. So that's how it's characterized. And there's still a lot that we don't know about it, and there's increasing knowledge into what causes it. So we know that you have to have a predisposition, a genetic predisposition to MS. I don't know of anyone in my family who had it, but then a lot of my family, were killed. So I don't know if there was anyone who had it, but you have to have a genetic predisposition. But we also know that there are a lot of environmental risk factors, and about 75% is environmental. So that's something that gives me and lots of other people a lot of hope that there are things that we can do to potentially change the trajectory of the condition. But in terms of how it affects people, it's so varying because it depends on where it impacts the brain and the spinal cord. But the most common symptom is fatigue. And from what you said before, you probably relate to that. But when you say fatigue to a lot of people, they just think, oh, well, you're tired.
Yes.
No, this is not that kind
It's a whole different ballgame. Yeah.
Completeness is like cannot move. A muscle cannot move fatigue. It can affect people's vision. So a common early symptom is blurry vision, and so there's optic neuritis, which can present early on where there's damage to the nerves. For some people, there's pain. Quite a common experience is pins and needles feelings, but through different parts of your body and constantly, not like it comes and it goes. Or it could be numbness, so you actually just don't feel parts of the body. For some people, it causes weakness in their limbs, so they can't, like I know that I literally couldn't move my arm, I couldn't feed myself, I couldn't pick up a pen, I couldn't do that in the early days. It can cause like tremors for some people, what's called foot drop, so you're kind of dragging your foot along. Can also cause like speech disturbances. It can be a loss of balance, people falling over all over the place. So there's lots of different ways that it can present.
And so what can you now kind of take us to that year when you were diagnosed, and you say you came across the professor, I think it was Professor, do you pronounce it Jelinek?
George Jelinek.
George Jelinek. You came across him, and he changed the trajectory of you and this illness. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, 100%. So in those days, if we go back to what I was describing before, when I had a sense that there had to be something else. Somehow, and I do that somehow.
Yes.
My sister came across an article, or someone she spoke to found this book that Professor George Jelinek had written, I think only about a year earlier. So he's a professor of medicine in Australia. He's a researcher. He is one of the most extraordinary people I know. His mother had MS, and she died as a result. And then he was diagnosed with MS as well, and he'd seen what his mother had gone through and how debilitated that she had become. He had to help care for her and brush her hair, and she ended up taking her own life as well.
Wow.
And then he was diagnosed, and he was prime of his life in a really busy emergency department. He was a professor of emergency medicine, actually, and he thought there's got to be something else. Because he had a medical background, because he understood research and how to analyse it, he researched everything he could about this condition, and not just in neurology literature, but across a whole range of disciplines, and found that there's actually a whole lot of stuff out there that's evidence-based, that's scattered in the literature, and he pulled it together. And initially he started off with a little post-it note that he stuck on the fridge, which was a sort of a 5-point summary of the things that he was going to do. And then he thought, and he started doing it, and he started getting better. And then he thought, no, actually, I can't just know this information for myself. I have to share it with others. So he wrote a life-changing book for so many people. At the time, it was called Taking Control of MS. And that's another thing about how sort of language changes, as time goes on. But my sister found this book and she read it to me because I couldn't even hold it by myself. And as she was reading it, it just made sense. Because here was a doctor, he was someone who had gone through it himself, had seen the impact on his mum. And I'm a psychologist by background, so having something that was evidence-based was really important to me. So I kind of it was a no-brainer for me. It was like, here's something I can do. Here are things, practical tools that I can implement in my life. So yeah, why wouldn't I do it? And just to say, so that the practical things.
I want to know what the 5 things on the post-it notes were.
So what we recommend and what the evidence suggests is that a diet which is low in saturated fat, so that's no meat and no dairy and no fried food and coconut, but it means loads of other things, and it just opens your horizons to a wonderful world of food. So that's one thing. Supplementing with omega-3s has been that's really important. Vitamin D also, we know, is hugely important for so many conditions, but particularly for MS. And exercising as you're able to, and meditation, or stress management, or so different with that. It's what we were talking about before, which is taking care of our mental and emotional space, and as well as medication as required. So they are the steps. And I just thought, what have I got to lose, actually?
Yes.
And there was nothing that sounded controversial or that had side effects, negative side effects. I mean, a heap of positive side effects, I would say, 20 years later. And so, that was the start of my journey to wellness.
So when you started to implement sounds like just really commonsensical lifestyle. I mean, we should all be doing that. We should all be eating healthier, exercising, taking the supplements we need that our body can't produce itself, and and taking care, as you say, of our psychological, well-being. Did you start to see immediate changes? Like, how did that work?
So for me, I would say probably, this is the thing. Lifestyle interventions are not a quick fix. Take a pill,
a quick fix.
And the next day.
Yes. Yes.
And so I would say I saw a lot of changes over that first year.
Yes.
Maybe over the first month, there were some tangible things, but there were definite milestones along the way. Like, I remember, the first time I could take a breath and it wasn't painful.
Wow. Yeah.
And I remember, like when I could tilt my head that way and it didn't feel like electric shocks were going all the way up and down my spine.
Wow.
And yeah, so that it was kind of slow and steady. And to be honest, it was probably about 5 years
Yes.
before most of my symptoms had gone.
Yes.
And yeah.
So the thing I wanted to, because I can definitely relate to lifestyle changes. Don't cure you overnight, and even in my kind of physical journey, I've seen that it can be quite, at times frustrating because you're making changes that sometimes aren't so intuitive or natural or easy, and you're not getting the results. Or sometimes you do, and then you go backwards. One of the
100%.
things that has helped me is that, again, like just connecting to this part of me that knows you're okay gives you kind of the freedom to just keep going with it and not feel a sense of urgency or needing a quick fix. And knowing that you can see that it feels like it's the right direction. It feels almost directional rather than something that's going to, but a lot of people I've seen can't, and I've even had my dips with this. So when I say a lot of people, myself included as well, I've had my dips and then had to get back on course. But I'm sure that a lot of people, especially when you're feeling so tired and having the pain, etc., that will struggle to stick with it. They will struggle to find the perseverance and the patience. As you said, like I saw these little milestones that gave me hope. But do you find in your experience now, and I wanted to come to the fact that you've set up your charity, the OMS, and helped thousands of people, do you find that people struggle to maintain that when they're not getting the kind of quick results that, they probably would like to see?
Yeah, 100%. And, it's not easy. And for some people, it's really, really hard. And for some people, it's too hard. Just what you were talking about before reminded me a big part of my own, I think, healing was about getting to know myself better. Like in the fast pace of crazy life, it's so easy not to know what our needs are, how we work well, how we thrive, and so that's been a real sort of journey for me. And there's been hundreds, if not thousands of times where I've kind of got a bit better. And as you say, then I'd start to do all this stuff and then I'd go back again. And gosh, that's been a real learning. And part of the learning is, I think, being to not be hard on myself. Like I used to beat myself up and go, oh gosh, you just can't do anything by it. And look where you are now. And but actually looking back now, each time there was like inches forward and then back and then a bit more forward.
Yes.
Back.
Yes.
So giving myself permission to that and really learning what were my triggers. For me personally, stress was a huge one. So if I had too much stress and I could feel the physical symptoms. And it was actually something that because I studied hypnotherapy with my psychology course. And in the early years, I was doing a lot of sort of self-hypnosis. And one of the things I kind of said to myself was, if I'm doing too much or out of balance or whatever, I want my body to have tingling in my hands, right? So kind of programmed that in. And so every time I had tingling in my hands, I was like, shit, I've got tingling in my hands. But it was a sign, it was like,
Yes.
what do I need to change? What do I need to rebalance? Where do I need to focus? So it was actually
Wow.
quite helpful.
That's really interesting because you had told me before that when you start to get stressed, the first thing you felt was tingling, because we'd spoken about this mind-body connection and how you cannot separate the psychological and physical. They're so intertwined, but we do. We think they're almost separate.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that you had almost programmed yourself, because often we miss it. For me, my body often has to be screaming at me in order for me to listen to it, which is why I'm sure I've got this chronic issue now, because there's something I have to learn. And as you say, really get to know myself. So, I mean, I can so relate, Linda, when you speak to these getting to know you. And it might be the same for you. I've just got a sense. But the sense of kind of, people call it A-type personalities, but people who are incredibly productive and, and going. And, and that's definitely what I've come up against. I mean, 3 months ago, I was starting to do better. And for the first time, I could go to the gym. I've been going to the gym for 15 years, 3 times a week. And I hadn't been in like 10 months. And I was starting to go to the gym again and starting to feel like I could function and not hit by a truck. But then I got a bit too excited and I had a trip to see my grandchildren. And gosh, I came back and the truck hit me again. And now I'm, kind of backwards. But it was just my propensity, because you also get so excited when you have energy. When you haven't had energy, almost just your kind of status quo is to use it. But finding that balance and getting to know yourself and your kind of what I call off-track patterns, the way that our minds think in a way it's not in service to our health, these lessons are not easy to learn for us humans.
And I think they're lifelong lessons.
Lifelong lessons. So with you.
You described it so beautifully, because, you're right. When we feel well, it's like we can conquer the world, right? And we want to do whatever we can and, help as many people as we can, or, and then it's like, and finding that balance is the golden nugget, I think.
Yeah. Now, can you just tell us a little bit about the charity you set up? And I'd also love to know if you could share your story, so inspirational, but I'm assuming that you've seen a lot of stories like yours, that people, that these changes have changed the trajectory of a person's kind of diagnosis and where they were heading with MS.
Yeah, sure. So after sort of getting better, after those days, I met my husband, who is English, and ended up moving to London. And it was interesting, because in that move, I made a decision that MS was no longer part of my life, part of my story. So I didn't tell anyone about it when I moved here, and just got on with life. We had quite a we got married, and 9 months later, Josh was born, and I've just moved here and didn't, really know anyone, so it was all quite, And after he was born, because pregnancy is protective for MS, but post-pregnancy, this it's more common to have a relapse after pregnancy. And after I gave birth, I was not feeling well, and I was worried that I was having a relapse, even though I'd been well for so long. And I decided to see a neurologist and have an MRI. And the neurologist, and I was really scared, to be honest, at that point, because I'd been doing so much to be well, and I was like,
what's happening here?
What's happening? But the neurologist looked at my scans and found that the lesions that I previously had were no longer there. So that
had you tested in the years again once?
No, I had. It was, well, I'd had two scans in the first 2 years in a row, and then not since until this point.
Yeah.
And from a medical point of view, and at that time, it was kind of looking at it going, this is really strange. And here I am thinking,
wow,
you know, I've worked pretty hard for this, you know, and it was a real indication that I was on the right track. Anyway, around that time, we went to an event run by the MS Society here in the UK, and I just started asking people if they knew about Professor Jelinek, if they knew about lifestyle interventions. And they all kind of looked at me like I was weird. And they said, "Oh, we'll find out for you. Don't worry, we'll find out." And I went home that night, and it was like an epiphany moment. It was like, you have to do something about this. And it didn't come from me. It came from wherever it came. But it was such a strong sense that I knew all this information, which, you know, I was blessed enough to have learnt from Professor Jelinek, that it would be negligent of me if I didn't share it. Right? So I thought, how do you even do that? Where do I begin? Kind of thing. And I just decided, kind of one conversation at a time, and then again, all these serendipitous sort of things happened. I called Professor Jelinek. I said, I've just got this crazy idea. What do you think? Do you know anyone in the UK who I can speak to? And he said, actually, right now, my web editor, he just had a web editor to pull the information together, is on a plane between Melbourne and London to see her mum who has MS. Why don't you give her a call? Wow, that's kind of a coincidence. And then I spoke to Lisa, and then she introduced me to another Lisa, and, you know, slowly things happened. So we decided to set up as a charity. And that was 10 years ago, just 10 years ago. Last month we celebrated. And we're registered in the UK, the US, and in Australia as charities. And
we'll have the links to your, if people want to, in the show notes.
Yeah, great. Yeah. And it's been an amazing journey. It really has. And we've touched, I would say, probably tens of thousands of people's lives. And
incredible.
You know, what we're about is, you know, empowering people to take control of their health. You know, to be informed and to make informed choices. And we also show them through our community and the people who have been on this journey that living a full and a healthy and a happy life is possible after a diagnosis of MS.
So important. I mean, I can't just even seeing you, and when you talk about that first year and being so debilitated and not being able to pick up a book or independently go to the bathroom or do anything, and then seeing you now, and I know that you've climbed mountains and, you know, been a very, very active person. It's just so hopeful, and it's so the opposite of the narrative that's out there. You know, when a person thinks of getting these kind of autoimmune, you just think, that's it. I'm an invalid. That's my life gone. And so it's so important. And
unfortunately, you know, as we sort of spoke about earlier as well, that's the news that a lot of people are still given at the time of diagnosis. And not everyone, and it is slowly changing, but I think the power that health practitioners have is still huge, even in this day of information on the internet. But it's like the nocebo effect. There's the placebo, and then there's the nocebo. So when you're told there's nothing you can do, then it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and a lot of people kind of go down that path. But so that's really what we're there to do, and what we'd like to do is to change the paradigm of how MS is viewed, and a lot of work to be done still.
A lot of work, but
one step at a time.
I know what you feel, because from a psychological sense, also came up against feeling like this is a big thing to do, because the mainstream is so set, and it's almost like trying to shift a tanker that doesn't want to move at times, But as you say, you see little bits of movement, over time. And
and I must say, 10 years ago when we started this, and we were speaking to other MS organisations, and it was kind of, who are these crazy kids on the block? And now lifestyle management is so much more mainstream across the board. Heart disease.
You do say that, but and I want to come next to COVID, because you've got quite a COVID story. But when COVID happened, that wasn't what we were seeing in our newspapers. Change your lifestyle, exercise, vitamin D, healthy, all these things. I was seeing that because I know where to look for that, but I'm sure you were too. But generally speaking, that wasn't what was coming through the mainstream media. So in a way, it was like kind of showing where we're up to. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. Yeah.
Our work is definitely not done. But it is reassuring that other organisations are offering exercise programs, and starting to talk about.
There's more voices. There are more momentum. Yeah,
and definitely where heart diseases now compared to 30 years ago.
Yes,
if you're not told about these same, and actually it's the same stuff across all conditions.
All conditions.
That's the irony of it.
Yeah.
But I do see a change, and I do see progress, not as fast as we would like. But
well, good. So now coming to COVID, because I didn't want to leave this piece out, because you were in Australia, and I think that you kind of got stuck in Australia for COVID. And most sane people, when you hear someone was in Australia for COVID, whatever your feelings are, you think, oh gosh, I would not have liked to be in Australia for COVID. So I know it was particularly hard for you, and you got separated from your husband for an extended period of time. You just tell us about that period for you, and kind of what you've learned through that.
It wasn't what we planned, but then I think that's what COVID's shown us, so that life's what happens when you're busy making up plans. But we had planned about 6 years before to spend some time in Australia. All my family are there, and really wanted the kids to have an Australian experience and to spend time with the family. And we landed in Melbourne, of all places in Australia, which was 3 weeks before COVID hit. And we had no idea what that was going to mean, but the kids were starting at new schools. We'd gone there to spend time with the family, and we were supposed to be living with my sister and her husband, who were sharing the house. I was supposed to be seeing her dad every day. We were going to be all together as a family, and my husband, Tony, he was going to be kind of back and forth a bit with business. But he came back, and then he got stuck for 6 months. So none of that was quite anticipated. And so my sister, because then we had to work from home, school from home, so they moved to their farm, which was a couple of hours away. So we didn't see them pretty much for 6 months after we were then living together. And my dad lived 5.5 kilometres away from where we lived, not 5 kilometres, which was the regulation. In Melbourne was really strict. So the streets were policed. We had a what they called a ring of steel between metropolitan and country Victoria. So it was hardcore. The curfew was at 8 p.m. every day. You couldn't walk with it, you could only walk alone or with one other person, I think, at times for an hour a day.
Gosh.
So yeah, and then because of the time difference, I was working nights and homeschooling days.
Thanks.
And not getting enough sleep and separated from my support networks in the way that I had hoped to be. And it was really hard. Also managing transition, kids were going through and that stuff. So I must say I came probably as close as I ever have in my life to not for it, having a mental breakdown of some kind. I got to a point where I felt like I was 24 hours away from my physical health completely plummeting.
Yes.
And it was a really scary place to be.
Wow.
And so I needed to make some decisions, some lifestyle decisions about what I was going to do, because I wasn't willing to go there.
Yes.
Been there, done that, don't want to do that again.
Yes.
So yeah, it was intense.
Wow.
But I did, I asked for help, a lot of help. And I've always been the one giving help. We know if it's what we do.
Yes.
So it's hard to accept help. And I, learned that very well when I was MS. But then life gets back to normal and forget about it.
Yes.
And I made some sort of decisions about sort of changes in my life, so I wasn't going to be as crazy manic, because it just doesn't suit my body, my temperament, but yeah. So,
it is interesting how we feel like at times just when we're getting a bit complacent, we feel like we've got this, and then kind of something hits us again, and we realize, okay, maybe not as much as we thought.
Yeah.
I remember my mother once saying to me at a certain time that a lot was coming her way, our family's way. And I remember I was a bit younger, her saying to me, just want everything to settle down and get back to normal. And I remember just thinking that she seemed to have this impression that normal is good in the status quo, and then occasionally in life you get something difficult, and hopefully that won't happen again. And I kind of had a different philosophy on life. I was thinking, no, these things are going to keep on coming because we need them. They are life lessons, and they're as much a part of life as the time when nothing's going on. They're as important. They're not something that we should wish away, because then there's no evolution for us. I always feel like they come with love. Like I always feel, I've spoken before on this podcast about there's this concept in Judaism called Yisurim Shalava, which are these tests, these suffering, the struggle that are gifted with love, because it's the only way that we, as humans, we have to have that in order to grow. We have to have that in order to kind of, almost some part of us has to fall away and something new has to emerge. And we don't really do that when we don't need to. Generally speaking, we just kind of get on with life. So you are an incredible student of life, which is not always, again, so intuitive for people. It's like when these things come, you open yourself up to learning, and that's a very beautiful attribute. It's such an important attribute. It's something, again, we try to share with the young people we work with, because often in this generation, you're told as soon as there's discomfort, kind of get rid of it, distract yourself, medicate it, whatever it is, just get it away. And that means that there's something wrong with you, except you have a mental illness, you have an anxiety disorder. But instead of saying, no, that's our discomfort because something feels too challenging for us. And unless we learn what that is and where our kind of the root of our insecurity and work through that, then we're not developing that resilience that we're going to need for life. It just keeps getting kind of pushed away. And then, you get into the bigger world as an adult and we don't know how to live with adversity. So,
100%. And I really feel like, life keeps us, as you say, kind of what we need to evolve at times in our lives when we need to evolve. And it is through the hard stuff and the sticky stuff and the stuff that we want to get rid of that growth happens. But we need to, find a way to embrace it and recognize, I think, that they're gifts in a way. I mean, I certainly look back on my life and think that I was gifted with these challenges along the way because they've made me who I am and they've allowed me to do the work that I've been doing and whatever will come next, and it's each step that leads to the next one. So I'm grateful for all of it, actually.
It's a good attitude to have. I'm sure your mom is not here. Your dad, though, would be very proud. You think of people who, came, they crossed their path, the greatest adversity, people kind of not wanting you to live, hunting you down, and what they went through. I think they'd be very proud of a daughter who has the attitude you have. So, but Linda, I have to ask you, because otherwise I'm going to get into big trouble from, I live with 6 boys. I mean, 5 are moved out of home and a husband who are massive football fans.
Oh my goodness.
And so if I didn't ask you about your husband, what it's like to be the wife of, Tony, for those that don't know, is the owner of Brighton FC, who's one of the most successful Premier football clubs. And he has got a lot of respect as a football owner because of what he's done with the club. And I just know that my family are big fans of, we Man United fans, but they're big fans of Brighton. And
we're not that against you.
So what is it like to be the wife of an owner of Brighton?
I'm glad you asked me that question and not the offside rule. Or
I can deal with the offside rule. I can deal with that.
And given the fact that I'd never seen a game of football in my life before I met him.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So that wasn't his criteria, right?
No, that wasn't. What's it like? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of weird because at the moment, Brighton are doing incredibly well. They're 6th on the table. They're still in the FA Cup, and there's been a whole lot of press about Tony and about the club, and I read this stuff, like I get the Google alerts and perhaps I could read about what he's doing. And it's kind of weird to think, well, that's just my husband. It's like, it's just
like a celebrity.
We have dinner together. And so I don't actually think of him in that way at all. He's the most, humble, down-to-earth guy, I know. And he's an amazing family man, always prioritizes me, the kids, and so we go to the club and there'll be people when we're at a game who will stop in and ask for an autograph or take a selfie or something. I just think it's hilarious.
I get it. That's your husband.
This was my husband,
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of him. I mean, he is amazing, and I'm very blessed. And back to sort of what you put out there, that was another thing back in the day when I sort of wrote a list of all the qualities that I'm looking for in a partner, having had broken up from a long-term relationship. And pretty much ticks all the boxes.
You've got those boxes ticked.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the way you described him, you need to have that kind of groundedness to be the owner of a football club because of the ups and downs of the experience. I mean, it sounds like he's had quite a stable in comparison to some others. but I'm sure there's lots of stuff coming at you. So.
Yeah, and he's sort of been supporting the club back in the days when they were in League One, and going up and up. So he's been through lots of challenging times, but he's got an incredible attitude to life. He's probably a role model for me. He celebrates the wins. He, lets the losses go, looks at what he can learn from it.
Yeah,
that's what he's been brilliant at, is creating a team of people in his business, football club, and charity work that we do, and all around people who can help support and hit.
That's amazing. And I don't even want to bypass what you just said, because it's such an important thing for, and again, I keep coming to young people, and I don't want to exclude adults, because it's as important for adults, but I feel like young people grow into adults. And if we could grow into adults, it's something I've tried to teach my children, because it's something I learned from the kind of resilience framework that we teach, is that when you understand that your security lies within you and that it's not an outside thing, then you can, as you say, enjoy the wins and learn from the losses. You're not like a puppet on a string, that the wins give you a high and the losses give you a low, and that these things have power over your emotions. You understand, no, like you are having an experience of them and your stability lies within you, and then you can respond to them, in a measured, considered way. But it's something that, again, like so many of our children just grapple with. And it's almost like, it doesn't matter social media and who likes them and who looked at their post and who left them out and what's going on out there, all seems to have this, they think it has this power, to kind of affect their well-being, to either give it to them or take it away. And then they're just up and down and up and down. And that's kind of the melee of the generation. So those kind of role models are just so important in a family, in society, much
actually
needed.
Because there's been a lot of articles recently. I've seen some of the responses people have sent, like, oh, you must be so, so proud, so this, so that. And he said, you know what, it's lovely.
Yes.
But, the press easy to turn the other way as well. Things are not going so well. So having that kind of recognition, as you say, that whatever happens externally, if you know that you're on the right path and doing the right thing, then whatever happens can be just noise.
That's priceless. It's really, to me, priceless. It's like just an invaluable, something invaluable to give over to our children. So I guess, Linda, you've been amazing, and I've got one more question for you, which is, what are you grappling with or learning right now? I mean, you've learned so much, and I just want to say you look incredible, and it's amazing just to see you looking so healthy and vibrant. And as I said, it's really a big inspiration and going to be for many, many people watching, listening to this podcast, this episode. What's right now you're kind of learning?
What first thing that comes to mind, and it's, as we've been talking about, lifelong learning, but it's sort of become pertinent again lately, is about finding the balance, recalibrating, and really figuring out where I want to focus my energy next. And something about and something about where I can have the greatest impact while still maintaining my needs of
taking care of yourself,
taking care of myself,
and
not going back into crazy mode. So that's this
Yes.
something around that of making a positive impact in a measured and
considered way.
What?
Well, Linda, I want to thank you. There's so much wisdom that you share and that comes out of you in such a natural way. And it just is so helpful across the board, whether someone's struggling with, with their physical health or their mental health or just with life in general, because there's a message that comes across from you, which is that you're a student of life, as I said, and you're reflecting and you're working on it and you're realizing that I think it's the most beautiful work to do. I always say it's not people think it's a difficult work, or when I hit rock bottom, maybe then I'll kind of look at myself for what I'm doing. But I think it's the most important work and the most uplifting work. And as humans, we should all be curious about our psychological / spiritual / physical functioning. It's who we are. We've got this one lifetime to learn about that. And you do that in such a natural, intuitive way. So that's really inspirational. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Terry, for the opportunity to have a conversation with you. I must say, at the beginning of it, I had no idea what we were going to talk about, and I survived.
Survived, and your hair looks beautiful.
Oh, thanks. Washing it helps, yeah.
Yeah, it looks good.
But also just, to thank you for the incredible contribution that you make to the world and the wisdom that you share and the children whose lives and adults you shape. And you're an incredible role model, and it's a pleasure to know you.
Well, thanks, Linda. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow or subscribe so that you can stay up to date with our latest episodes.